Talk about his book, which is an amazing book on vernacular architecture. He is an author and editor of many books, and crucially was the editor-in-chief of the German journal Detail from 2016. Personally, I'm fascinated by the vernacular, and in fact, Gavin and my education at Liverpool seemed to thread the vernacular through so much of what we were taught. And it seems perhaps it's always pertinent, but right now it seems hugely relevant to be asking questions about what we've been learning from simple ways of building, simple technologies, thoughtful social structures, and fundamentally sensitive ways of building in relation to the environment. Although Christian might explain that one of the curious things about vernacular architecture isn't always as sustainable as it seems. Christian, welcome and thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Simon, for the introduction and also for the invitation for today. I'm pleased to be here and to be able to speak about my book. Simon already showed it to you about vernacular architecture. And before we discussed about the talk today, Simon also asked me to speak not only about vernacular architecture and comment, but also a bit about the book, how it came to make the book, and how it came, a bit about the history of the creation of the book. And I have, if I want to explain you how it came to make the book for me, I have to go a little bit further, I think. I also studied architecture. I studied in the end of the 1970s and in the beginning of the 1980s in Munich. And I think I was fascinated or interested in vernacular architecture already since that time, but the fascination increased a lot when I came first to Asia in the middle of the 1980s. After university, I had a job. I was employed in an architect's office for about 3 years. And when the project where I was in charge of was completed, I decided to change the office and to use the opportunity to change the office for a break. And I went for some months to Asia. I backpacked in Asia, and I didn't know really in the beginning where to go. And I came a bit by chance to China, but at that time China was a very, very impressive or fascinating country for tourists, because some parts, I think everybody knows China in the east, the Han Chinese mainly live, and it is very densely populated. But in the west, a lot of minority people live, and it's very not much populated. And when I came there, the east with the Han Chinese was already open for some years to tourists, to individual tourists, you have to say, because for tour groups it was always different. But some of the most interesting places in the West just started to be open just in the moment when I came there. And I had the opportunity to come to some regions with minority people as one of the first tourists since about 40 or 50 years, because China was closed for such a long time. And so in all these areas, traditional lifestyles were preserved in a way where they didn't exist in other countries. In some other Asian countries around, they also existed, sometimes in a similar kind, but you felt that there have been much more tourists and much more connections. And so this fascinated me a lot. I'll give you just some examples. This is in Sichuan, it's the very west of Yunnan province, where different hill tribe people, as you find them also in adjacent countries like Laos or Myanmar or the north of Thailand, live. It is true the same for Tibet. Tibet is a very fascinating place and a very, how to say, remote place. But also at that time it was not really allowed to travel individually through the country and go to villages. But if you were lucky, you could manage it. It always depended whether if you went by a public bus, if the driver let you out or of things like this. So, but you could manage that you travel. And also this was very fascinating. I came to some very remote villages. And another place which just was open when I was there is the very northwest. This is Xinjiang province. And this was a life which was really interesting because you didn't just see still the traditional and old architecture, but you saw a way of life of the people, how it existed for maybe centuries, a very long time, and it wasn't changed till then. And later, when the country opened much more, also these regions, and not only because tourists came, but also because they got much more information, they got television and things, so it changed totally. And I give you just some expressions. It's not about architecture, but it's very important for me also to see the life of the people. And at that time, you saw craftsmen working in open workshops in the street in a way as they did it for centuries, like the smith or the butcher who is open in the street, or a barber who treats his clients, and the other ones are already waiting. Yet it's open on the street. And also the clothing, everything was fascinating. And in a marketplace or in the bazaar, it also looked quite traditional. And that fascinated me a lot. And maybe also because I liked always to not only to look to architecture, but also to photograph and take pictures. And so this was maybe the highlight. I have to say, this is in Kashgar. Kashgar is the most western city in China, and is a cultural center of the Uyghurs. I think everybody heard about Uyghurs because they face a brutal oppression by the Chinese government. But at that time, nobody. Also, I didn't know about Uyghurs when I came there. But they have been oppressed also at that time, but nobody in Europe knew about it a lot. And it's not only the Uyghurs, it is a cultural capital in this region also for other peoples. Most of them, also the Uyghurs, are Turkic peoples, like the Kazakhs, the Kyrgyz, the Uzbeks, and they all come in the Sunday markets. Thousands of farmers from villages around came to the market and offered their goods. This is only one department for the animals. They stand there all day and bargain for sheets and goats and also camels and donkeys and different. And this is another section. This is only for wool, but it's also hundreds of people there. There are even other parts with only household goods or vegetable or fruits or things like this. I just wanted to give you some impressions, and I was also always interested in the houses, not only as an architect, but if you see the people and the life on the street, and this is so interesting, you also want to see how the people live. And I always tried to get into the houses, and I found out it is often at that time, I don't know if it's true today, still today, but at that time, if you showed a friendly kind of curiosity, the people were often very proud, also if they lived in very poor conditions, they were proud of their homes and they invited you. to get in, to have a cup of tea, and on the other side, they didn't meet many strangers. Some of them never have seen a stranger before, so they were as curious to meet you as I was to get. So I came into, on this trip and on later trips, I came to a lot of houses. These were Kyrgyz youths, I will show a bit more later. And the Kyrgyz there, this is also fascinating because this is in China, but the main population was at that time, today it is Kyrgyzstan, but at that time it was Soviet Union, but the tradition survived much better in China. They were also oppressed and they were also integrated into working communities, but they were allowed to live the same way of life they did for centuries. In what is today Kyrgyzstan, they were Soviet Union, they had to change everything, and so tradition just starts again. And yeah, this is a yurt, and the same people, they have a winter camp in fixed houses. This is on the right side. This is also in a yurt. And yeah, so I just want to give you an impression. I try to get into the homes. This is far and very remote region of Tibet. I had to go buy food for many days to meet these people, but it was really fascinating, and not many of these tents are still existing. And this is in Nepal. It's a house in the Kathmandu Valley, and yeah, just some impressions in Pakistan. I was invited into a family in Lahore. Family in this case means you meet only men, because if a male comes into the house, all the women have to go and eat separately in another room. But I just want to show different impressions of homes. This is in eastern China. Also in eastern China, the cave dwellings, which did still exist at that time. Now there are not many remaining. I will say a little bit more later. This is in Uzbekistan. It's the same culture like the Kyrgyz and the yurts, but they live in earth and stone houses or brick houses, but they have the carpets like in the yurt they have on the wall and on the floor. This is in Rajasthan in India. This is in the hill tribe region in northern Thailand. Just to give you an impression, I visited a lot of vernacular homes, and since that time I photographed a lot, I collected a lot of photographs, and since that time, since about 35 years ago, I did think about a book of it, but I never started it because first of all, for me, it was a very important project, and I had a lot of passion to the project. And so I wanted to have the time I need, and I didn't have it when I was editor-in-chief of Detail. And secondly, I always thought, I think this is normal, I have to collect more material. And so I didn't start it for a long time, but when I left Detail, Simon, I think, mentioned it was in 2016, the first big project was to start the book. And but what I did, I didn't plan it, but when I was editor at Detail, I often asked people who were experts about special types of building from vernacular architecture to write an introduction. And so doing this, I created a network with authors. And when I finally, many years later, started the book, I actually could let some of these authors contribute. Some others already had died, or I didn't have a contact any longer. Yeah, it's so long time ago. And what is also fascinating, maybe I shall also explain it. I always wanted authentic material, and as I think Simon also mentioned before, vernacular architecture is losing ground, is diminishing more and more. And so I found out that mainly people who have interesting authentic material like photographs did do these photographs already in the 1970s, 1980s or somewhere. And when I started the book, I myself was 60 years old, but I was among the younger authors from. I had authors in their 80s, and also one who became 90 when working on the book, and one unfortunately died. He was 95 when he started his article, but he finished the article, but then unfortunately he died during when the book was not yet completed. But I just wanted to explain this to show that often experts on this field are a bit older because some of the things don't exist any longer. And maybe I should shortly explain the intention of the book. So I wanted to give to show the variety. There's a huge variety around the world about vernacular architecture. I wanted to show this, and I wanted to give a kind of a cross section through the world of fascinating methods of building, but I knew from the beginning that you never can have a complete, complete compilation, collection, yes. And so it's a kind of arbitrary how to find the projects. And mainly, I looked for authors who had interesting material. I think this is one feature. The other one is to have cross sections through the world and also through material, ways of construction, and so on. So, and what what is also interesting, there are a lot of architects involved, which I marked in green in here. These are the authors' names. But it's not only architects. I had also anthropologists. They are blue here. And so-called house researchers. This is a totally different discipline. They are mainly concerned. They often work in open-air museums and are mainly very specialized on a very special type of building. And I also had some which don't belong to one of these groups. I even had, and this was fascinating, I had a dentist who contributed, but it did one of the best articles. He grew up in Eastern Germany, and this was at that time when he was young. It was totally, he couldn't travel. It was not possible. So when he came before the unification to Western Germany, and then he started to do exhibitions, and he specialized in ethno-medical research, and he went to very remote regions like here in Papua New Guinea, I think it's in English, New Guinea, and he what was fascinating, he not only researched how the people live and how are their health conditions, but also all their culture, including how they built their tree houses. And he did also a lot of photographs, and this was a very fascinating material and also article, because he was concerned also about the cultural background, but also about the construction and everything. And just to give two examples, this is another author who also don't belong to one of these groups. It is Gerd Kiesi. He is a trained photographer, but he already started also in the 60s to photograph these very fascinating earth buildings from the Gurunzi in this case, also from the Dogon. And he also contributed an interesting article, which I mainly choose because of his photographs. and yeah, very fascinating. And okay, this was the introduction how I came to publish the book. And I just want to give some of the maybe or to speak about the main features of vernacular architecture. Um, First of all, I think I have to give a kind of an definition and what kind of material did I collect in the book. It is the residential buildings of the ordinary population and ordinary people. That means there are no castles and no churches included, but only houses how people live, in which people live. But yeah, some experts go a bit further with the definition and say these are mainly the houses which are also Paul Oliver says mainly houses who were also built by village communities and by the people themselves and without professional help in planning and building. But this is very difficult to yeah to divide. So I decided also, because also in Germany, also in England, medieval half timber houses often have a professional carpenter who did the design and the, also the construction. But it's all only about housing of ordinary people. Then interesting is, or one feature is the use of material available on site. So this means they often seem to literally grow out of their surroundings and they shape the face of cultural landscapes and regions. I will show some examples to these points later. What's also interesting is the natural recycling, which avoids waste, and the reuse of building material, but what we just start to invent again today. But in former times, often people were so poor they had to reuse used bricks or stones or something. And yeah, then they often use renewable raw material from plants. They have often very ingenious systems for passive climate control or for also exploiting natural conditions for heating and cooling. And sometimes, not always, they are very space saving. Already the settlements are often space saving, not only they are very compact and dense, not only for means of defense, but also to have more area for agriculture, which was important. And yeah, sometimes in Japan you have this example, they use the same space in the floor plan for different uses, for sleeping at night and for working or relaxing or something else during the day. And sometimes you find also very interesting examples of standardization and prefabrication. And but what I also have to say, all these features are about technique, about construction, about material, and we may not forget that a house, a vernacular house, is often much more. It is a cultural, how to say, habitat of its people, and so it has often also a symbolic and sacral significance. And so in tradition, or traditionally, its shape and appearance are also largely determined by social, cultural, and religious aspects. I think this is also very important. And this means that form and ornaments often symbolize cultural and religious values. There is an ornament is not just an ornament because somebody wanted to have a nice design, but it always have a meaning. Yeah, and this is the last point I already said. It's a component of the culture of the people who live there. Yeah, I just want very short give some impressions. The use of material available on site. In this case, it's stone, and I think everybody can see if the stone which you see on the rocks in the background, the houses really look growing out of the landscape. And the same here with earth. This is in Morocco. same material. And also fascinating, this is also in Morocco, that this is a kashba, a form of fortified, better fortified family house. And when it is left and nobody lives there any longer, it becomes the same landscape. It is funny. I took this picture after the work on the book because I went to the place where my author about Morocco photographed 40 years ago the houses, and this was not in the book, but the kashba next to it was in the book. It also it didn't look like this, but also a bit in between a good house and already, how to say, natural, recycled. And yeah, but it's fascination. It's a very interesting form of landscape, and if you don't look carefully, you will not see that this was a house before. And I already mentioned that material was very valuable. And so in China, it has a long tradition that you reuse. People couldn't afford that you throw old bricks or stones away. So there's a big tradition. And this is a tradition which the famous architect Wang Shu, who also got the Pritzker Prize, reinvented also by chance, because when he did it on the Xiangshan campus, this is the University of Arts in Hangzhou, he didn't plan it before, but then they run out of building material, and his, the chief of the construction site asked him, what can we do, and may I use some used material, I can buy it cheaply. And so later it became one of his main features of his architecture. And yeah, this is in Rajasthan, India. You have sometimes also market which sell on the street used building material like windows or doors or something like this. And this is the next feature. This is renewable raw materials. And all over the world, people invented a lot of interesting constructions or methods to use plant material. This is sea wet. It is in. I took the picture in a open air museum. This is from a Danish island, Læsø, but it's in the open in Lyngby near Copenhagen, in the open air museum. But it's fascinating. Well, I think everybody knows these impressive roofs in Japan, which also a very sophisticated system, and even this is also raw material. The ropes which they tie the rice straw to the roof, and also the floor plan reacts to the use of raw material in the roof, because in the center of the house, in the ground floor, they have the fireplace, and the smoke has to go through all the house. So they have always this opening. Such a roof can have only the roof 4 different stories to kill the vermin. So this is good to protect the roof, but not so good for the people, because they often get eye diseases. Also in Japan, I don't know about it, but I have been to houses in Pakistan where every second child had an eye disease, because they all day long, the fire is burning, and they, I just as similar as I showed it in the book, I selected different possibilities, like this is from the tree, or big leaves and straw, and fascinating all over the world. And what is also fascinating, this is also raw material. The structure of the house is is made of timber, which lasts very long time. It is a tropic timber, but the facades and the roof are made of bamboo, which is a very fascinating material, but it don't last so long. So, but people can do it easily themselves. They don't need not many tools. With only one knife, a special knife, they nearly can do everything. They can cut the bamboo in the forest. They can put it to different lengths. They can split it to make this kind of woven facade. And yeah, before we spoke about sometimes people also in former times wasted material, and this is one example, because the hill tribes in this area, Laos, northern Thailand, and so on, they wasted they had a monoculture, and when the soil was exhausted, they changed the village some kilometers. And the house, the timber structure, this is the Chinese or the Asian plug-in structure, so you could easily put it, how to say, dismantle it and easily put it up again. And the other things, the facade and the roof, they find new bamboo, and because also in this case, this was in the 1980s, they didn't move villages at that time, so this was an old house which got a new facade and a new roof, because yeah, this is also a feature of vernacular architecture. You must maintain it a lot, and a facade or a roof like this needs to be renewed every about 5 to 7 years. So the people are always concerned in working on their houses. But what is also fascinating, this is from Myanmar, and this is not so old. The picture is from, I think, 2015. And in a very poor country like this, you still today find people or complete villages which only exist of raw material. In this case, it's nearly only bamboo and palm leaves on the roof. And this is fascinating in terms of sustainability, but it's a very simple living, and the people are quite poor. In better regions, they have already concrete houses. And this was also interesting for me, because in this house, half is raw material, half is corrugated steel. And I asked the people, why is only half the house in corrugated, half the roof? And they told me, this is so expensive, so we only had the money for half the roof, but we save money, and in 3 or 4 years we also can afford to have the second half in steel. And they are quite proud to have a house with a steel roof. And to be honest, it protects better from the monsoon rain, and it don't afford or don't need so much maintenance. Yeah, just some pictures to the passive climate control. This is also from the same museum in Ljungby, close to Copenhagen. These are houses from the Faroe Islands, and it just shows how houses were integrated into the topography. So that on the western side, where the wind is coming, you have earth, and yeah, it doesn't become so cool. And we have also this thick layer of earth with grass on it, and this protects the house. And only to the south and southeast you have a wooden facade. And the other one I showed already before, some pictures from cave dwellings. This is in central China, in the region of Xi'an. And when I was first there about 30 years ago, this on the left side is pictures from that time. Still about 30 million people lived in houses like this, but you also can see that are very poor houses. But it was very interesting, because they cut courtyard into the ground, and then they dig the houses or the single rooms. Every room is a single, how to say, compartment digged out of the earth. And so they, this is very temperature balancing, because it's also very hot in this area in summer and very cold in winter. So it moderates the temperature, and it saves ground for agriculture. Above they can have agriculture, but as I mentioned, it's a very poor living and needs a lot of maintenance. So I was there a second time in 2018, and you found only very few houses like this. I was with an expert from China traveling there, and he wanted to show me some, but he even didn't really find. And finally, we came to this one. This is a kind of a museum, because the father from Xi Jinping, the president of China now, grew up there. So they conserved it and they changed it. And there are some others like this, but if you come to them, you see only old people, like maybe more than 70 or living here. No younger people are live there any longer. And some others are preserved and used as hotels. But more than 90% diminished, I would say, within 30 or 40 years. And this is, yeah, I can understand, because it's a very poor living, but it's a pity that the houses disappear. Only an example, this is in Morocco with nomads, which also live in caves in their winter camp. In the summer they have tents. And yeah, just some features, some impressions to the feature: passive climate control and natural ventilation. I think this everybody knows. This is in Dubai, but to have the same wind towers in Iran or other countries in the region. And the right picture, these are the very sophisticated bay windows in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, which bring fresh air to the houses, which are good for ventilation, but in this case also they protect women from, they can take part on the street life, but they are not seen. This is also one reason of these bay windows. Yeah, ventilation in India. And another interesting point is these are so-called sky well houses. They in China, in Jiangxi province, is also in the east, and they have very cantilevered roofs, so they are protected from the sun, but all the water is very, very valuable there. So they have always the well. You see it on the picture above on the right, and they collect the roof helps to collect water. And yeah, before I already mentioned also the settlements are often very compact, and you can see not only because of fortification, but also to have space for agriculture. Before was Morocco. This is in northern Pakistan in the Hunza area, which is also close to China, Afghanistan, and these countries. And then another thing is I also spoke about the multiple use of space, which you find in Japan. I think the old Japanese houses are interested in a lot of terms. I don't have the time to speak about all of it. It is also standardization, prefabrication. Standardization means you have the grid of the tatami mat, and all the measures of the house are based on this grid. But what is also very interesting in Japan, this is also in a museum, a farmhouse museum close to Tokyo, an old farmhouse. I think it was about 400 years old, and this is the famous imperial Katsura villa. And I think there's not so much difference in the space, how they handle the space, in the material, in everything. Only a little bit, maybe also a very interesting feature is the integrated furniture in the houses. And here it is a bit more ornamented than in the farmhouse, but the rest, the rooms are a bit more spacey, but the rest looks quite similar. And what is also interesting to compare is that in regions which are very far from each other, if how to say, wenn die Voraussetzungen,
the conditions?
yeah, if the conditions are about the same, also the houses look quite similar later. This above is in Bavaria, in the region of the Alps, and the house is, the roof is made of wood shingles, and the wood shingles are, they have heavy stones on it that the wind don't blow it away. And the house down is in Japan, and also which is called the Japanese Alps, and they look quite similar because due to the stone, they have to have a certain how to say pitch or angle, and if it would be straw, it would be much more pitched, and so, and yeah, also, and this is interesting to find such similar. Yeah, it even looks similar here. It don't look similar. There are half timbered houses also in Germany. This is northern Bavaria, and in China, a so-called Weiwu, which means enclosed house. And yeah, the houses look different, the structure also, but it is half timbered, and the space between the timber frame in Germany, it is branches which are kind of woven, and the mud or the earth is put on it. And in China it is bamboo, but the same technique. And I think it was developed totally independently, but if there is not so much timber that you can build a full timbered house, so you have to find an idea or have to have an idea how to fill the space in between. And yeah, I want just to give you one more impressions about 2 or 3 special types. One of it is a yurt, I'm very interested also in architecture of nomads, because I'm fascinated in the life of nomads, but also for their homes they have had to develop very sophisticated solutions because they have to protect them, but also they have to be very easily to be put up and to be dismantled and also to be carried on. Yeah, on the left side is a yurt from Kyrgyz people. They carry it on camels. On the right side, this is a Tibetan tent. I want to show it as an example of the black tent because both types, the yurt is, the name is from the Turkish, comes from Turkish, and normally or actually don't mean the tent but the campsite. So, and in Mongolia it's a ger, but it's quite similar, a little bit different, but quite similar. And the black tent is a form of housing which you find from the north of Africa, from Mauritania and Morocco, over Iran and Afghanistan till the highlands of Tibet. And these are countries with very different temperatures. The common thing is they are all very dry, so they don't have, but the kind of tent is quite yeah, similar, not too similar, but a bit similar. And yeah, nomadism is a very interesting form of life because nomadism mainly exists where on the landscape there's no possibility of agriculture because it's too dry, or in Tibet it's too high, sometimes more than 5,000 meters, and the people need the animals in between them, the landscape and them. The sheep and goats can use this very scarce amount of grass, and then the people take everything from the animals. The milk first, but also the meat, but also the wool for the tents, and yeah, even the bones for tools, and so this is, and so nomads often live in the most unhospitable regions in Earth. And yeah, this just shows this is also about 35 years ago. You just, in very West China, you still could find not only the original yurts, but also the people working in their traditional clothes. And this is, yeah, they prepare, this is, you know, the nomads move their tents about 3 or 4 times a year, not too often. They don't just walk around, and they always also have very fixed campsites. So one family owns this side and next time goes to the next. And all these nomads in very unhospitable regions have fixed winter camps. In former times they mainly were also tents, but I showed it before in one of the pictures. Today or some decades ago, it was more and more stone or fixed houses, and they have to collect a lot of. On the last, these are always the best meadows with the best grass, which are close to the winter camp, and then in September they have to gather or collect grass for the winter, that they have enough for the animal. And a yurt is a very fascinating. It's a construction. It is a masterpiece in standardization. I can show it here. This is a different one. This is in Uzbekistan, but you can see the principle. One is that it's standardized. It's always about the same size. There are bigger one and larger one, but quite the same. And one thing is they are optimally adapted to their surroundings. That means they protect you or the people there from very cold weather, but also from big or very hot sun. And they are even very good against wind because they are a kind of aerodynamic or round shape. And they are also adapted to the place because there is not much wood existing, so they don't need much wood, and they even only need very small, how to say, sections of wood, not big big timber sections. Yeah, I could explain a lot about the construction, but I think we will lose too much time. But I think everybody can see how fascinating, because this is a kind of a lattice trace, which you see here. You can put it together for transport, and if you put it up in a round circle, it is very stable. And the yurt is the structure is self-supporting. It's not a tensile structure like the tent, because they use the felt, which they made from sheep wool, and the felt is, you cannot take tensile stresses. So Zugspannungen ist richtig, oder?
The pressure, the tension.
Tension, yes. And yeah, this is a picture how they are dismantled and packed for loads, one for one camel. And yeah, what's also interesting, and this is due to very many vernacular types of building, that people mainly all day long, if they don't care for their cattle or for their animals, they have to work on the house. And work is very much divided in all old cultures. There's work which only women do and work which only men do, but it's never mixed. And the young girls and the women, they have very small rooms, and they work on carpets, which are important. But also I did, maybe I have now I had here. To counteract the dome pressure, they need how to say, a belt, a woven belt around. This is what the girls just did, and others are working on carpets, but they are always they always have to do something for the house. And what is also important is that the ornaments on the yurt, they are not just ornaments, they are very nicely mainly on the edge between roof and wall. And the ornament above is about, it indicates the tribal affiliation and also the affiliation of a certain clan within the tribe. And the other one on the door also shows how is there to protect the yurt, to protect it. This is the entrance door, that no bad spirits or no ghosts are coming in. So it always has a meaning. Yeah, the interior is a very good space. You have the roof top, you have a, like in the Pantheon, you have a top light in a round structure, and in the evening you close it, then you don't lose heat. And yeah, in former times there was the fireplace in the middle. Today means also some decades ago, there is a cast iron stove in the center. And I changed to Tibet. This is an impression of the countryside where I saw the tents. You see, it is a very you don't find, it's a poor grassland. You don't find much grass, but it's an impressive landscape. You see the yaks. The Tibetan mainly have the yaks, which but they also have goats and sheep, and they use, I just mentioned the black tent is distributed from northern Africa till Tibet, and most of the peoples who use it use goat skins, or goat, not skin, what is the wool of the goats. But in Tibet they use the yak wool, but the qualities of the yak wool is quite similar to the goats, because it is very strong against tensile tension, yes, and also it swells. So when it becomes wet, it swells, and the holes in the fabric become closed. And it has also a natural fat, so it's water repellent. And so it's also an architecture of nomads, but it's totally different, because this is a woven fabric, and so it can take tensile tension, and so yeah, it
can be stretched.
Yeah, it's totally different construction, and it's a tensile structure, you can say. And yeah, here you also need not much wood, even less than for the yurt, but you need bigger sections for normally you have 2 posts inside and 1 ridge beam, and you have, which are big sections, and you have some others which are a bit smaller. And this is even lighter than a yurt, but you can see it, the fabric is very, how to say, very light. So, but I was told it worked for centuries, but today, due to the climate change, it does rain more often, because a tent like this can withstand rain for about half a day. But in former times in Tibet, it normally didn't rain longer, because it's always a change between rain, sun, and also snow. And if it rained for half a day, sun came out and the tent dried. But due to the climate change, it becomes warmer and it rains more than it snows. And now they are not so good any longer, the tents. And also they don't find so much grass, because grasslands become more arid. And yeah, but it's a very fascinating. What I did forget to say when I explained the yurt, inside a yurt and inside a tent, everything has a fixed place, so nothing is just, nobody sits where he just wants, because normally in the yurt, the women sit on the right side or live on the right side and have all their goods on the right side from the entrance, and the men on the other side. And here it's opposite. The men, this is the entrance, and the men sit on the right side and have their goods, their saddles, their tools, everything they need, and the women are on the other side. And as I mentioned before, also work is very strictly divided, and in this case, women are most of the day are concerned to process milk, because this is one of the main principles. They have sheep and goats and they get the milk. This is also the work of the women to milk. The men look for the animals and see that they are together, but the milking is done by the women, and the processing of the milk, because milk don't last very long, but they process it to butter, and they stitch the butter into sheep stomachs, and so it can last up to, and they salt it, and it can last up to a year. And also they process cheese, and so in a tent a woman is nearly all day long occupied by processing milk. And this is normally on the left side, and the other is on the, and yeah, it's just because it's fascinating. Yeah, the area is so poor, but since centuries, it's tradition that the men go with caravans for weeks, hundreds of kilometers to lower areas where agriculture happens, and change their goods, which is meat and skin and also salt which they found in this area, to vegetable, tea, and yeah, household goods. So, and yeah, I think not today any longer, but 30 years ago you still could find caravans like this, and they transported on the yachts like they also transport the tents on the yachts. And how long time do we still have?
Keep going.
Only two more. I also choose the Tulo. I think most of you already saw, maybe some already in nature, some on pictures. The Tulo, this is, most of the things I just explained was interesting because of material, because of construction. The Tulu are also very interesting because of a kind of co-living, and but they're also quite interesting because of structure and material. They are in Fujian, in the southwest of China, and sorry, southeast of China, and they are very thick walls of rubbed earth, and inside you have a timber structure. And in one Tulu, a complete clan lives together. That means all the people who live in one Tulu have the same last name, and so never people from one Tulu may marry each other. And there are smaller ones, but there are also, I will show you later, smaller ones with maybe 60, 70 people, but there are also some with more than 800 people living in it. And normally it is, yeah, you can see the different sections here, and one small family always owns one of these sections, which are always same. The only thing is that the orientation is different to south or north, but the space is the same. So it's a kind of equal living, communal living. And Also here everything has strict rules, and always the ground floor is occupied by the kitchens. And you have, today you often have two kitchens. One is protected by the cantilever roof and one in the open air, but the place, the court in the Tulu is, yeah, not only for cooking, but also for gathering, for meeting your neighbor, and for sitting together, but also for drying your laundry. And you see also here you have on the upper floors you have these corridors, and maybe 4 times you have a step which leads up. This is one of the biggest Genki Lu, and this is the one with about 800 people. And this is also interesting because not always, but in this case also the court is, there is something built in, and this is, if something is in the court, it's always communal space. Each Tulu has a temple for the ancestors, and this is very important in China. So they are one big family, so they have the same ancestors, and this is in the very center here and around. This is one of these circles around is a school for the children of the Tulu. And in the other circles are also spaces used for the community. So it's also a fascinating thing of yeah, living together. And I also should say there are rectangular Tulus existing and round ones, but they're always, yeah, organized about the same with these. This is a section through a rectangular one, and what you can see, this structure is different to most other Chinese houses, because in China it's normal that nearly every supporting structure for the roof is made of timber, and even if the wall is stone or rubbed earth or something, and it's always divided. You have a wooden structure, and around you have divided from it stones. And in the Tulu it's different. You have this very thick rubbed earth. This is thick, no, thick is right. Yeah. It's thicker or bigger in the ground floor. It can be up to 2 meters, and it becomes a bit smaller every floor, and then you can lay the wooden structure on the step in the wall. And I also should explain the intention of the Tulu is also defense. The people who live there are called Hakka, but this is not a minority like the others I showed before. These are Han Chinese who came to these regions from far away, more than 1,000 years ago, because of some rebellions or political problems. And Hakka means they are guests, and they had to defend, maybe also against their neighbors, but also in these areas a lot of bandits and gangs were on the way. So this is a kind of living together, but also defending a clan. And this is one of the corridors you see, and you have here always the doors to the single rooms. And what is here you can also see what I explained. This one family has one section. It's normally that in the ground the kitchen, but above the kitchen is a storeroom. Then is the room for the parents, and then for the children. So the parents and the children live on different levels. And if you want, if you are a child and want to go and eat something, you have to go maybe 3 floors down. But in interesting form. Yeah, this is a roof structure for Tulu. You see how it is lays on the rubbed earth wall. Very fascinating. And the last thing I want to show is a a smaller form. This is also from Hakka people, also in Fujian province in China, but about 200 or 300 kilometers north of the Tulu. The Tulu, I think, are well known, and meanwhile also in some of the most important, they are UNESCO World Heritage, and you find a lot of tourists in the most famous one. You even have to pay entrance fee, but what is okay? I just want to say they are very, also in most of the tourists, maybe 90 or 95% are Chinese, but they are in the cultural consciousness of the country and also in the consciousness of tourists. But this is a similar form, also co-living in the same province, but it is from the same people, but nobody knows about it, and it is very difficult to find. Even if you drive with a Chinese friend to ask in the area, it's very difficult to find it. And here only a small family lives in, this is always one. This is a family of 5 brothers, and each brother with his small family has one of these long houses. And what's similar to the Tulu, you have also the temple for the ancestors here with a courtyard. Then you have a common hall or space. This is the entrance hall. So you have a lot of things for community. Also a school. This is not often here, but even here a school is connected for the children. And one feature which all these Weibus have is that you have a defense wall to the hill. They are always lying on a hill, and on the hill you have the defense, and on the other side also, but no, it looks different. And yeah, this is also a fascinating plate. What I want to show with this picture, you can use, if you have communal living, also a lot of tools and stuff together. And this is also in every Tulu you find in the entrance, you find the rice mill, which all the community can use. And then the temple for the ancestors is a little bit more ornamented, sophisticated wood carving. The other spaces are very simple, but we spoke about the integrated benches today with Simon and Laura. You also find it on these bridges. What I forget to explain before, between the longhouses you always have a kind of canal, because you get the water. This is very sophisticated, the water from the hill, and the used water. So first you get it, fresh water, and then you put the used water in the same canal. And between the houses you have always these bridges, and the bridges are also places where people meet, where benches are integrated, and also the canals are a favorite place for the animals who live here. And you have very fascinating different forms. Some are totally alone, far off in a forest of bamboo, and others have maybe some small farmhouses around. And yeah, I think this was the last picture. I want to end with this picture. I hope I could give you some impressions of the, of the interesting features of vernacular architecture, and also that, of the features of sustainability and all the good qualities. But I also want to say you may not glorify vernacular architecture, because we spoke a bit about it before. If people had, also in former times, if they had material as much as they needed, they also wasted it. And what you also have to recognize is vernacular architecture did exist or was developed under totally different conditions to our living today. So the houses, I think you saw it, often very poor. So you often can understand when people in these countries say, I want to have a concrete house, or I save money to have another house. And this is one thing. They are poor, they need a lot of maintenance. I think some of the examples also showed it. And today, if you are employed in an office or somewhere, you don't have the time to always work on your house. And the last thing, but it's also important, I think, I think I also explained it a bit with the yurt and other buildings. The life was due to big constraints, big regulations. So it was a totally other way of living. Often women were divided from men, and servants were not allowed to enter maybe a house. Also in poor villages there was a distinction between higher class people and lower class people. And also ghosts and things like this, spirits had a lot of influence in the floor plan or in the construction. So I just want to say it is often a very different kind of culture. So we cannot take over complete solutions from vernacular architecture, but we can find a lot. I tried to show a lot of very interesting features. I think Simon already also mentioned it before, how we can use this, how we can work today with very simple solutions and with saving material and with local material and not from very far away, and also with simple solutions for climate control and ventilation and things like this. I think in this concern we can get a lot of good ideas from vernacular architecture. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Christian. That's amazing. That's brilliant, and so much. Should we turn the lights on? Actually, so much appropriate building, if you know what I mean. I know there are kind of perhaps versions which are wasteful, but so consistently beautiful, thoughtful, protective, cultured, cultural, efficient, just so many good things in so much of that work, and similarities and differences, just an extraordinary body of work. And you said at the beginning how you perhaps almost apologise for not covering all the ground, and I mean, just imagine how heavy the book would be if you had succeeded, if you know what I mean, in finding more. So it's wonderful. Now, can we get you a drink, and then can we?
Yes, please.
Can we ask you to answer some questions?
Okay. Yes.
Is that okay? What would you like? A beer?
Yes.
Anyway, well, I'm going to ask one question. And obviously, you've been thinking about the subject for 35 years, and you mentioned Rudowski's book, the name of which I now can't remember, but you write about it in book, and we were talking about Team 10. And I guess I'm just curious about over the last, say, from the 1950s, over the last 70 years, kind of how we've sort of not changed our views of the vernacular, but how may have changed our interest in it. How's that interest changed, or do you think it has changed?
Yeah, you just mentioned Rudowski. I think he was one of the persons, who involved, or how to say, influenced us a lot that we look at vernacular architecture, because his book Architecture Without Architects is very, very famous, and at that time there were not so many books existing, and the exhibition was very important. And because it was a time of the modern movement, and I think at the time not so many architects were interested in old stuff, and he opened the eyes from architects, I think, to look at this, and so he did a very important work. But we also discussed it this morning. He mainly looked on forms and facades, and he was not so much interested in the cultural background, even not in the interiors. He collected he also didn't do the pictures himself. he collected pictures he found and did an exhibition. And yeah.
So in a way, it's become a more cultured. I mean, clearly from where you were talking, the way you started talking, it's very much about understanding the way of life that has precipitated or prompted these ways of living, building. I'm conscious there's lots of people here, so I think it'd be really nice to let everybody else ask questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. My question is just about how the people themselves feel about the vernacular architecture. You mentioned how we shouldn't fetishize it and understand if they want to go for corrugated steel or iron. But I know that they're in the UAE, for example, they're constantly monetizing their former Bedouin past, or in Turkey they're creating hotels out of the cave dwellings.
Yeah.
Is there a sense among them of there's an intangible heritage that they should hold on to? Or
I think sometimes it is. Also, first of all, I think I tried to explain it before. Often the vernacular architecture is not so much estimated among the people because it's poor. And they see also in television and that in the West or in other countries, people have much better houses. And I think you must understand, if a country is developing and not everybody wants to live maybe in a rammed earth house, even if he has to maintain it nearly every month. But the examples with the hotels and the cave dwellings, I think this is something you find often in the world. That this is one possibility to maintain vernacular architecture. Also, I showed it in the cave dwellings. Sometimes it's also a hotel, but so people now, the tourists or other people from other cultures are interested in it, and so they start to make, I don't want to say business, not because it's negative, but they try to earn their living with this building. I think this is okay, and I think also they change their mind about vernacular, because first they didn't like it because it's poor, but then they see people in most of these countries I showed pictures from are always looking to the West. They get orientated on the United States, but also on Europe. And if they see that people from the West came only to visit their buildings, they get proud. They start to get proud, and so I think a hotel is a good idea. If you don't change too much, I think you always have to find the balance that is still traditional. Also, in one example of the cave dwellings is not only for hotels, but also when people are still living there. Before, it was just cut out of the ground, and you had a sharp edge on the roof. And now everyone who is still existing has a balustrade. It's by law, because people could fall down, but I don't know in former times did they also fall down or not. But today you will not find anyone without a balustrade around the courtyard. And in the hotel it's necessary, I understand. Yeah.
Thank you for a beautiful talk. It was very inspiring, and I think I'm sure lots of us in the room are, feel a great connection with that as architects. And probably a lot of us in the room are kind of, certainly myself, sort of wonder, what you can do with that, and how you can, how you can work with it. And I suppose my question, I suppose, would be, what do you think is, what is there such a thing as vernacular architecture today in the modern world, in Western culture, with all of the difficult conditions we have. Well, they are conditions very different, but they're conditions of need, economy, protection, security, economy, knowledge and construction. I wonder if you might think there is such a thing as vernacular architecture in the modern world. Learning from Las Vegas, Rain Bannon, in a way talked about this idea in Los Angeles in the 70s. Can it exist? Posit that thought to you.
Just repeat the question. You think if vernacular architecture can exist? Or?
Maybe to ask it in a different way. You know, we're confronted by the same problems in a way.
Yeah.
Building housing for ourselves. Let's leave out churches and museums and airports and things, but housing made in simple ways with low budgets. I wonder if you recognise vernacular architecture today. Can we say what, in terms of modern Western society, we are making vernacular architecture through the conditions we have? Low cost.
Yes, sure. I think,
albeit less geographically specific. We buy our windows in Germany and our bricks in Belgium and our heating systems in wherever. It's a question of scale of geography.
Yeah. So you think if it is possible that every region has its own feature or its own, and we don't have one architecture like it is today, which is the same in Japan and here, or I think it would be nice if it could happen. And I think maybe we cannot directly translate it, but we can look at many of the features of traditional architecture.
I thought that the slide where you juxtaposed the timber frame building in China with the mud and the timber frame building with the same I forget where that was. Another side of the world, in a way, confronted the same solution, the same problem.
Yes.
Stephen, I've sort of got one of the things that interests me about this is it's an architecture very much driven by material constraints. You have a room a certain length because that's the beam size that's available, and actually as architects we've learned to design almost without constraints. Actually money is pretty much the only constraint. Yeah. Beyond that, technology can do pretty much anything you want. But what interests me about the current position is when we look at embodied carbon, it's a different way of reintroducing material constraints to what we do, and that's actually a positive thing. I think it's working within constraints is usually a very creative thing. So I kind of find something interesting about being forced to accept the constraints that have been invisible because we've all ignored the carbon implications and material implications of what we're doing, as not a driver for vernacular design, but for a driver for a design that responds to the material constraints of the world we're in. And there seems to me to be an overlap there with the drivers behind what we've been listening to this evening, which I find a very interesting and actually quite positive dimension to where we are.
You only have to go back a couple of generations to my grandparents, who were kind of they just happen to be old grandparents or something, and their take on the use of things was simply that things were scarce, and so they were living very sustainably. This kind of living unsustainably is a relatively recent problem, at least in relation to consumption and having no limits. I mean, Barnum Calder's book about the role of energy production in relation to the evolution of architecture is really interesting because it's shocking. He talks about the amount of carbon used sort of at each, when you go from using timber to the amount of heat and energy you get out of timber versus the amount of heat and energy you get out of coal versus the amount of heat and energy you can get out of burning oil, and the correlation in terms of the way in which exactly those kind of lack of constraints just kept opening up and opening up and opening up, century after century. So obviously it's not just sort of 3 or 4 generations ago, it's actually a couple of millennia ago, but it is interesting that we're starting to constrain ourselves again after what has been a kind of open-ended time. Process.
Hi Christian, sorry, that was really amazing. I was very jealous of all the extensive travelling that you've done. I was just wondering, in terms of when you come visit the families really often and so on, do you ever stay in the vernacular homes, or do you kind of go off somewhere else? I'm just wondering what your experience of that is.
I didn't stay often, to be honest, because the people live very poor and they don't have room. I once stayed in one of the yurts, but normally when I traveled in remote areas, I had my own tent with me, and sometimes I put my tent next to the Tibetan tent, or so. But yeah.
Did they ever stay in your tent and experience that?
Yeah, and for the Tibetans it was very interesting to see normal, how to say, trekking tent, how you put it up, and how everything is so simple, so light, and so it confused me, because when I put up my tent, about 10 people around and looked, and it was a heavy wind, and it was not so easy. And so, but all were curious and looked, yeah. But it is what I mentioned before, that often people there are as curious in meeting you and seeing, yeah, a stranger, but also the stuff of a stranger, what he brings with him, and yeah.
Do you think that opportunity is gone?
Sorry?
The meeting strangers, do you think that's disappeared with the modern world? As you said about the Uyghurs, once they have television.
Yeah,
when you were traveling, the shock of the
disappeared, because I mentioned before, I was lucky to be in some areas, mainly in China, which were just opened. And the very remote areas in the far northwest, maybe, they didn't have any television. Even some villages didn't have electricity, and so they were really cut off. But now, in the remotest areas, you have television, and also in the same way, a lot of places are really destroyed. So you can't find this. I think I only can speak of Asia, but in the last 30 years, I think there was more destroyed from vernacular architecture than in centuries before. So.
Well, a statistic which I thought was amazing, the cave dwelling, for 30 million down to a few hundred. I mean,
but it's really poor. I think the pictures showed it. It's a very interesting, also a very sustainable form of living, but it is poor, and it takes a lot of...
30 million people are now moving somewhere else.
Yeah, but in China, they destroy complete towns and villages and bring the people to other places. I think in this country it is not so unnormal. Yeah, and in China you see how much the big cities increase, because all people from the countryside go to Shanghai, Beijing as workers, and so. Yeah, also in normal villages which are not poor and look good, people leave, and also only old people are remaining.
I think there's something really lovely about time in all of this, and it feels like, although we've maybe heard some of these ways of building described as simple, they actually seem incredibly sophisticated in their own way, and that's developed over time, in perhaps long periods of time. I was really curious as to whether you ever saw sudden technology changes happening? We sort of noticed this while in the process of editing the book, or if you had any more to say actually about the kind of gradual sort of process of developing these technologies.
Yeah. Also in former time, you never can say some type of building is the authentic type because it always developed. But some developed more and others less. I think the yurt is really a very old type of building which was so sophisticated that it didn't have to develop for, I think, 500 years or something. And other types also in Europe developed. So I showed the Bavarian roof with the shingle legs, and in Bavaria, in the time before, it was also thatched roof. So you had a totally different shape because it had to be very steep. Then the shingles came, and then it was very flat. And later, in the time of industrialization, they started to produce brick in a big amount, and the same roofs became brick roofs. And then also the shape of the roof changed again. And it was better because it was better protecting from rain. But on the other side, brick is not very sustainable. I saw a lot of big buildings today, but brick, I think today with the gas crisis, everybody knows that it takes a lot of energy. And also in vernacular architecture already some centuries ago, I think brick in former times, it's a very, very old material, but in former times, also in Europe, only rich people like it's for castles and churches, and you used brick, and normal people had the half timber, mud or earth construction. And one example is India. I think the British started the brick production, and then a lot of forests had to be put down just to have the energy to produce bricks in India. So, but I wanted to say brick is a very good material also today, but it's also not, it's a development, but not always better in terms of sustainability. But you have better comfort.
Presumably there's a question of longevity about that. I mean, if a brick building lasts 300 years, then you can grow a lot of trees in that time. But also, if you're having to maintain something every 5 years,
totally right.
That,
it's very difficult to exactly how to say tell if something is sustainable or not, because if it lasts very long, you have also to calculate it's totally true. Yeah. And
anybody got any more questions? I mean, I tell you what, please be welcome to stay, have another drink, and ask Christian. But perhaps I'll say thank you on behalf of all of us, and allow you to not feel like you're on the spot. Okay, Christian, thank you so much.